Reparations are not a charity, they are not a handout. They are a debt that is owed directly to the descendants of enslaved Africans in America. But today, there are global movements from Africa to the Caribbean that are telling our story for us and even trying to put their hands on what is rightfully ours. So let's talk about how we protect our lineage based reparations and why too often we're being left out of the conversation. Our ancestors built America through blood, sweat, and generations of unpaid labor. Reparations must be tied directly to that lineage, to those who can trace their ancestry to U.S. chattel slavery. That's not just history, that's a legal claim. Without a clear definition, anyone can step in and water down our inheritance. America owes a debt to us, not to a vague category called people of color and not to the global diaspora as a whole. Solidarity with Africa and the Caribbean is beautiful, but solidarity is not substitution. Their claims are against European colonial powers. Our claim is against the United States, period. Part of the problem is organization of why we're being left out. The Caribbean has CARICOM, CARICOM. Africa has the African Union. But African Americans don't yet have one unified national body with that kind of global power. And when we're not organized, it's easy for others to step in, speak for us, and even negotiate on our behalf. That's why we must demand lineage verification in every reparations bill, local or federal. We need black led legal and financial institutions to make sure no one hijacks our reparations. And if necessary, we need to use the courts to stop any attempt to funnel reparations away from the people who are truly owed here in America. This debt belongs to us. It is specific, traceable, and non transferable. It's not for Africa to collect, not for immigrants to claim, not for politicians to redirect. Our ancestors earned this check, and it has our name on it. African Americans were deliberately denied political, economic, and organizational power after slavery. So, through Jim Crow, voter suppression, and systemic exclusion, we were historically oppressed and there was suppression. Grassroots organizations or organizing existed in black churches, fraternal organizations, civil rights groups, but national scale coordination was hard under constant surveillance, intimidation, and repression. So we became fragmented within our own community. Different visions exist, ADOS, FBA, lineage based focus versus a broader Pan African or diaspora perspective. Cultural, regional, and class divides slowed unified organization. There is co optation and misdirection. Governments and institutions often recognize representatives who were easier to influence. Sometimes these were scholars, NGOs, or self appointed spokespeople rather than grassroots descendants of enslaved Africans. Building a national body requires funding, infrastructure, legal teams, and communications networks, things historically inaccessible to black Americans due to systemic economic exclusion. And why is the FBA late to the game of reparations? Because there was an awareness gap. Many descendants didn't realize the full scope of reparations, the lineage based claim, or the global Pan African narrative until recently. We were focused on survival. For generations, the priority was survival, education, jobs, property, and community resilience under oppressive systems. Advocacy for systemic reparations had to wait. There's also an organizational knowledge gap. Organizing a national body requires legal expertise, lobbying experience, networking, and strategic planning. FBA movements have only recently begun consolidating these resources. We've experienced fragmented leadership. There are many leaders, but no universally recognized or democ- democratically elected council for FBA lineage based reparations. Without clear leadership, progress is slower. Now, we can build a national organization, but we would have to define the mission and the scope, the elect leaders and governments, right, or governance. We would have to incorporate as a nonprofit or advocacy organization, ensure bylaws protect lineage-based representation and prevent external co-optation. Membership and outreach, strategic partnerships, funding and infrastructure, and an action plan. The bottom line, the delay in FBA representation is due to systemic oppression, fragmentation, lack of resources, and leadership gaps, not inability. By defining a clear mission, electing accountable leadership, building legal and organizational infrastructure, and mobilizing the community, African Americans can create a national body that speaks with authority, protects lineage based reparations, and ensures our ancestors' debt is paid. The blueprint for creating such a organization on a national level, there must be a mission statement, there must be a purpose, there must be organizational structure, there must be advisory councils, there must be operational departments, and there also must be a membership model. And for sustainability, there must be initial funding. There must be strategic goals, there must be action plans, and there must be long term vision with key principles. Let's look at colonial versus internal oppression. Many nations that are now seeking reparations, the Caribbean countries, African nations, they experienced colonial occupation, but they were recognized as sovereign nations, even if the colonizers controlled them. African Americans, on the other hand, were enslaved within what became the United States and legally considered property. There was no nation to advocate for property belonging to another nation as a collective political entity. And what about post colonial mobilization? After independence, countries like Jamaica, the Barbados, and Ghana had governments and international recognition, and that allowed them to formally demand reparations through international law, diplomacy, and treaties. African Americans were citizens of the very country that enslaved them, often denied political rights through Jim Crow, voter suppression, and systemic racism. So collective bargaining power was nearly impossible for generations. The Caribbean formed a regional alliance of sovereign states to collectively demand reparations from former colonial powers. They had diplomats, legal teams, and unified governments to speak on behalf of millions of citizens. The AU, the African Union, and its expert group on reparations were able to coordinate continental strategy, link countries, and engage in global diplomacy. African nations could leverage recognition in international law, UN bodies, and multilateral negotiations. Now, the U.S. African American was at a disadvantage. African Americans were denied a unified political voice for decades, lacked control over government mechanisms, and often faced internal divisions over strategy. There is no national body with the legal and political weight of a sovereign nation speaking on behalf of African Americans, which is why FBA and similar groups are late to the game. Sovereign nations can demand reparations from other nations because of international law recognizing their claim. African Americans must rely on their own country, the U.S., to pay reparations, which is harder because the U.S. government is both the debtor and the policymaker. So the diaspora groups may also lobby the UN or AU, But without recognition as a nation, their claims have less immediate legal weight. There was a generational lag in resource access limitation. The Caribbean and African nations could invest in legal research, lobbying, and international alliances immediately after independence or during reparations movements in the 20th century. African Americans had to survive systemic exclusion, economic oppression, and social violence, which delayed the formation of national organizations and access to legal resources. Other oppressed nations already had formal reparations bodies because they were sovereign entities. They were recognized by international law. They had government infrastructure and diplomatic channels, and they could organize collectively without facing internal suppression. African Americans, though numerically large and culturally powerful, were politically and legally constrained, which is why lineage based reparations advocacy has only recently gained traction. African Americans are late to the game because they never had sovereignty, they never had political leverage or unified legal representation for generations. Other oppressed nations could organize and negotiate internationally due to recognized nationhood. FBA must create a national body, unify leadership, and leverage both legal and political strategies in order to claim lineage based reparations. A national body for FBA or African Americans is not a country. It's a centralized organization that represents the collective interests of African Americans in matters like reparations, policy, education, and advocacy. Democratically controlled by members, in this case, descendants of enslaved Africans in the US. They must be legally incorporated as a nonprofit, an NGO, or advocacy group, which allows it to operate nationally, hire staff, lobby, fundraise, and engage with government and international bodies. It must have they must be independent in decision making, meaning no external group, no African nations, no NGOs, or government controls it. Being sovereign isn't necessary. Sovereignty is about having recognized political authority over the territory, which African Americans cannot claim inside the US. But power doesn't require sovereignty, it requires organization, legitimacy, resources, and a unified voice. Many advocacy organizations, unions, and civil rights coalitions influence US policy without being sovereign. The national body, if created, can lobby, right? Create policy, file lawsuits, um, teach African Americans about reparations and lineage and history, right? Counter misinformation, build funding and resource and have resource control, build reparation funds and scholarships and economic programs under the control of African Americans, and attend UN, AU, and other global meetings as a recognized advocacy body, even without sovereignty, in order to protect the narrative of African Americans' lineage based claims. Because without a national body, African Americans remain fragmented, easily sidelined, and excluded from reparations discussions. A unified organization amplifies political power, even in a country where sovereignty is impossible. This body is the mechanism to collectively define our demands, represent our lineage, and enforce accountability. The bottom line is this: African Americans cannot become a sovereign nation inside the US, but we can create a national body with centralized leadership, legal authority, and organized membership. This is the most practical and powerful way in order to secure reparations and protect lineage claims. And we then will be able to shape our own destiny. we would have to create platforms, target have targeted campaigns emphasizing reparations advocacy, right? Have lineage-based membership and community empowerment. But also, what about partnerships and alliances? HBCUs and academic institutions, they can collaborate for research, legal studies, or program fundings. The joint initiatives can attract grants and sponsorships. Strategic partnerships with the diaspora and Pan African organizations can open access to international funding, resources, and advocacy networks. Black owned businesses can incorporate sponsorships, joint programs, or investment in headquarters infrastructures. If we want to protect lineage based reparations, we are going to have to organize, speak with one voice, and never let anyone rewrite our story. Reparations are not optional. Reparations are not global charity. Reparations are justice for African Americans, the descendants of U.S. slavery. If you believe in this message, drop a comment, share this video, and subscribe so we can keep building the movement. Our ancestors fought too hard for us to stay silent now. The time is now, the debt is due. Thank you for watching. Bye.